Picture this, a small Ohio town, its heartbeat stolen by a shuttered steel mill, a father's hands trembling as he loses his lifeline, and a boy, barely 9, swearing through tears to rewrite their fate. Welcome to Heartfelt Tales, where I, your storyteller, peel back the raw, unfiltered layers of human struggle and triumph that'll grip your soul and refuse to let go. Today's saga, the father who lost his job and the son who built a business empire, isn't just a story, it's a roller coaster of heartbreak, betrayal, and redemption packed with so much grit it'll leave you breathless. This video is loaded with twists, failures, and a father-son bond that defies the odds, so don't you dare click away, watch every second to catch the full weight of this epic journey. If it hits you hard, smash that like button, drop a comment, tell me, could you rise from these ashes, and subscribe with that bell on, because here at Heartfelt Tales, we don't just tell stories, we ignite them. Let's dive in, right now. Act 1, The Stable Years. The steel mill loomed over the town of Harrow, Ohio, like a giant made of smoke and iron. Its stacks coughed gray plumes into the sky, and its whistle screamed at dawn and dusk, calling men like James Carter to work. In the summer of 2004, Harrow still felt alive, gritty, loud, and proud. The mill wasn't just a factory, it was the heartbeat of the town, pumping life into every diner, every corner store, every clapboard house along Maple Street. For James, it was home as much as the little yellow house he shared with his wife, Lydia, and their son, Ethan. James was 41, broad-shouldered and steady, with hands rough as sandpaper from 2 decades twisting wrenches and coaxing machines to life. His brown hair was streaked with gray at the temples, but his eyes still held a spark when he talked about the mill. He'd started there at 19, straight out of high school, and never looked back. The pay wasn't grand, but it was enough for the mortgage, for Lydia's garden, for Ethan's crayons and notebooks. He wore his faded blue coveralls like a badge, the name, Carter, stitched in red over his heart. That July, the air hung thick with heat and the hum of cicadas. James came home late, his boots thudding on the porch steps. Ethan, 8 years old and all knees and elbows, bolted from the living room, his dark hair flopping over his forehead. "Dad's here," he shouted, skidding to a stop as James pushed open the screen door. Lydia glanced up from the stove, her apron dusted with flour, and smiled, a tired, warm smile that softened the lines around her eyes. "Smells like heaven in here," James said, dropping his lunchbox on the counter. He ruffled Ethan's hair, leaving a smudge of grease on the boy's cheek. "What's my little engineer up to?" Ethan grinned, holding up a notebook. "I drew the big crane today, the one you said lifts the steel beams. Look." The page was a mess of pencil lines, a towering crane with a stick figure James at the controls, a lopsided sun overhead. James chuckled, taking the notebook like it was a treasure. "That's a fine piece of work, son. Looks just like the real thing." He crossed the kitchen, opened the garage door, and tacked the drawing to the wall beside his workbench. It joined a dozen others, cranes, conveyor belts, even a wonky sketch of the mill's smokestacks. "This is us, kid," he said, tapping the paper. "The Carters keep things running." Dinner was simple, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from Lydia's patch out back. They sat at the chipped oak table, the radio murmuring country tunes in the corner. Ethan chattered about school, how he'd aced a math quiz, how he wanted to build a robot someday. James listened, nodding, his fork scraping the plate. "Math's good," he said. "Machines need numbers to work right. You keep at it, you'll be running that mill one day." Lydia laughed softly. "Let's not rush him, James. He's still got time to be a kid." "Plenty of time," James agreed, but his eyes lingered on Ethan, a quiet pride flickering there. He believed his boy could do anything. The mill had given him a life, and he figured it'd do the same for Ethan someday. After dinner, they moved to the garage. It was James's kingdom, tools hung on pegboards, a radio crackled with static, and an old Ford truck sat half-repaired in the corner. Ethan perched on a stool, watching James tinker with a carburetor. See this? James said, holding up a wrench. Hands build the world, son. Not fancy degrees or big talk, just hands. He guided Ethan's small fingers around the tool, showing him how to turn a bolt. The boy's face lit up, like he'd been handed a key to the universe. Will I get to work with you at the mill? Ethan asked, his voice small but eager. James paused, wiping sweat from his brow. Maybe. If you want it. It's hard work, but it's honest. Keeps a roof over your head. He didn't say what he felt, that the mill was his legacy, a piece of himself he'd pass down. Ethan nodded, clutching the wrench like a promise. The days rolled on like that, steady, predictable. Mornings began with the mill's whistle, James kissing Lydia goodbye as Ethan waved from the porch. Afternoons were for school and chores, evenings for stories and tools. Sundays were sacred, church in the morning, then a drive in the truck, windows down, the three of them singing off-key to the radio. The truck rattled, its paint peeling, but it ran, and that was enough. Sometimes, James brought home tales from the mill. Old Bill dropped a gear today, he'd say, leaning back in his chair. Nearly took out the conveyor. Took me an hour to fix it. Ethan soaked it in, eyes wide, imagining the chaos. Lydia would roll her eyes, you men and your machines, but she'd listen too, her hands busy with knitting or peeling apples. The town buzzed with its own rhythm. The diner on Main Street served burnt coffee and gossip, kids rode bikes past the mill's fences, daring each other to sneak in. But by late 2004, the chatter shifted. Men at the mill started talking, quietly, over cigarettes, about machines replacing hands. Automation, they called it, a word that sounded cold and sharp. James heard it too, in the break room, in the locker lines. They're testing robots up in Pittsburgh, someone said. Won't need half of us soon. Nah, James muttered, tossing his cigarette butt. I've been here 20 years. They don't throw that away. He believed it, or wanted to. The mill was too big, too vital. Harrow depended on it, depended on him. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the clank of steel, the hum of the line. It was noise he knew, noise he trusted. Winter came, blanketing the town in gray. Christmas was lean but joyful, a scraggly tree, a few gifts wrapped in newspaper. Ethan got a model kit, a tiny crane he built with James over 2 nights, their fingers sticky with glue. Lydia baked cookies, humming carols, while the radio crackled with snow warnings. The mill slowed for the holidays, but James still worked overtime, banking extra cash for the truck's new tires. By spring 2005, the rumors grew louder. A foreman mentioned efficiency cuts at a shift meeting, his voice clipped. James shrugged it off, but unease gnawed at him. He'd catch Lydia watching him, her brow furrowed, and wave it away. We're fine, he'd say, forcing a grin. Always have been. One night, Ethan sat on the porch steps, waiting for James. The mill whistle blew late, a long, mournful sound. James trudged up the walk, his lunchbox dangling, his shoulders slumped. Rough day? Lydia asked from the doorway. Just tired, he said, but his voice was tight. He didn't mention the memo he'd seen pinned up, a list of names, a meeting with management scheduled for next week. He didn't mention the word layoffs whispered in the halls. Instead, he sank into his chair, letting Ethan climb onto his lap with the crane model. Tell me about the mill again, Ethan said, spinning the toy's arm. James forced a smile. It's a beast, son. Keeps this town alive. Keeps us alive. He ran a hand through Ethan's hair, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. The mill was his world, steady, solid, eternal. He couldn't imagine it any other way. Lydia watched from the kitchen, her hands still in the dishwater. She saw the lines on James's face, deeper now, and the way he held Ethan a little tighter. She didn't ask about the mill. She didn't need to. The air felt different, heavy, like a storm brewing far off. But for now, they had this, the yellow house, the garage, the three of them under one roof. It was enough. Ethan fell asleep that night with the crane clutched in his hands, dreaming of steel and smoke. James stood in the doorway, watching him breathe, the drawing on the garage wall flickering in his mind. "This is us," he'd said. He meant it then, more Appaloosa style, and he'd mean it again someday. The mill's whistle faded into memory, but the promise it held, the promise of a good life built by hands, lived on in his son. Act 2, The Collapse. The spring of 2005 slipped into summer with a deceptive calm in Harrow, Ohio. The steel mill's whistle still pierced the mornings, but its rhythm faltered, shorter shifts, quieter lines. James Carter, now 42, felt the change in his bones, though he wouldn't admit it. He'd spent 20 years at the mill, his hands etched with its story, every bolt tightened, every gear salvaged. It was his anchor, his proof of worth. But the whispers of automation and cuts had grown into shouts, and on a muggy June afternoon, the truth landed like a hammer. James stood in the mill's break room, a crowd of workers pressed around a bulletin board. The air stank of sweat and stale coffee. A typed list fluttered under a thumbtack, names in cold black ink. His was third from the top, Carter, James are, beside it, a date, effective July 1, layoffs. No warning, no appeal. A foreman clapped his shoulder, muttering, "Sorry, Jim. Machines don't need brakes." James stared at the paper, his jaw tight, until the words blurred. He grabbed his lunchbox and walked out, the mill's gates clanging shut behind him for the last time. He drove home in silence, the old Ford truck rattling louder than his thoughts. The sky was a dull gray, pressing down on Maple Street. Ethan, 9 now, sat on the porch steps, kicking pebbles into the yard. He sprang up when he saw the truck, his grin wide. "You're early, Dad." James forced a nod, climbing out, his boots heavy as lead. Lydia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow creasing at the sight of him. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice soft but sharp with worry. James set his lunchbox on the counter, avoiding her eyes. "They let me go," he said finally, the words scraping his throat. 20 years, and they're done with me." He sank into a chair, staring at his hands, rough, useless now without machines to fix. Ethan hovered nearby, clutching a pencil, his grin fading. "What's let go mean?" he asked, tilting his head. "Means I don't work there anymore, son," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. "They got robots to do it now." Lydia's hand flew to her mouth, then dropped. "We'll figure it out," she said, but her eyes betrayed her, wide, searching. She turned back to the stove, stirring a pot of soup that suddenly seemed too small for three. That night, the house felt different. The radio stayed off, the silence thick. Ethan sat on the floor, sketching absently, cranes again, but slower, his pencil dragging. James watched him, then stood abruptly, retreating to the garage. He needed air, space, something to hit. He grabbed a hammer and swung at an old plank, the crack echoing. It didn't help. The mill was gone, and with it, the man he'd been. The weeks that followed were a slow bleed. The severance check, 2 months' pay, vanished into bills, electric, water, the mortgage. Lydia took in laundry from neighbors, her fingers red from scrubbing. James scoured the town for work, gas stations, warehouses, anything, but Harrow was a mill town, and the mill was dying. "Too old," one manager said. "Overqualified," said another. He came home each day with less in his eyes, his coveralls swapped for a faded jacket that hung loose on his frame. Ethan watched it all, his small world tilting. The truck broke down in August, its engine coughing out on a trip to the store. They couldn't fix it, money was too tight. Lydia sold the TV next, trading it for a week's groceries. The living room felt hollow without its glow, and Ethan missed the cartoons that once filled Saturday mornings. He started collecting cans along the roadside, dragging a sack behind him, the clink of aluminum his only sound. He'd dumped the coins into a jar, hiding it under his bed, thinking it might help. By fall, the cracks showed. James and Lydia argued behind closed doors, their voices low but sharp. "We can't keep up," Lydia said one night, her tone fraying. "The bank's calling, James." He snapped back, "You think I don't know? I'm trying." Ethan, curled in his room, pressed his pillow over his ears, but the words seeped through. He crept to the window, staring at the mill's distant smokestacks, dark now, no longer coughing smoke. One evening, James didn't come to dinner. Lydia found him in the garage, slumped on a stool, a bottle of cheap whiskey in his hand. His toolbox, his pride, a battered metal case full of wrenches and pliers, sat open beside him. Ethan peeked through the crack in the door, his breath catching. James's shoulders shook, a sob breaking free. He clutched a wrench, the same one he'd shown Ethan how to use, and whispered, "What am I now?" The words hit Ethan like a punch, raw and ragged. Lydia knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "You're enough, James. You're still us." He didn't answer, just stared at the tool, his tears glinting in the dim light. Ethan backed away, his chest tight, and ran to his room. He grabbed his sketchbook, flipping past cranes to a blank page, and scribbled furiously, "A house, a truck, a mill alive again." Under it, he wrote, "I'll fix it." Winter crept in, harsh and gray. The house grew cold, heat cost too much. Lydia bundled Ethan in 2 sweaters, her hands shaking as she knitted another. James took a job shoveling snow, his back aching, his pay barely covering bread and milk. One night, Ethan woke to footsteps and found James in the garage, the toolbox gone. He'd sold it, every wrench, every memory, for a month's rent. The wall where Ethan's drawings hung looked bare without it, the pencil lines fading in the gloom. The next day, Ethan emptied his coin jar, $3.47 from cans, and slipped $1 into James's coat pocket while he slept on the couch. "We'll be okay, Dad," he whispered, his voice small but fierce. James stirred, his hand brushing the pocket, but didn't wake. Ethan stood there, watching his father's chest rise and fall, the weight of the world pressing down on them both. By spring 2006, the family was a shadow of itself. Lydia's garden wilted, untended. James's hands, once strong, trembled when he lifted a shovel. Ethan, now 10, stopped drawing cranes. The mill sat silent across town, its gates locked, its stacks cold. Neighbors whispered about foreclosures, about families leaving Harrow. The Carters stayed, clinging to their yellow house like a raft in a storm. One night, Ethan overheard James and Lydia in the kitchen. "I failed them," James said, his voice breaking. "I'm nothing now." Lydia hushed him, but the words sank into Ethan's bones. He crept back to his room, climbed onto his bed, and stared at the ceiling. The mill had taken his father, not with machines, but with its absence. Anger burned in his chest, then hardened into something else, a vow. "I'll make us strong again," he said aloud, the words echoing in the dark. He didn't know how, not yet, but he felt it, deep and unshakable. He'd seen James's hands build a life, then watched them empty. Ethan wouldn't let it end there. He'd build something bigger, something the mill couldn't take away. For his father, for Lydia, for the boy who'd once drawn cranes with hope. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. The mill loomed in the distance, a ghost of steel and smoke. But in Ethan's mind, it flickered to life again, not as it was, but as it could be. He closed his eyes, the vow settling into his soul, a seed planted in the wreckage of their collapse. Act 3, The First Struggles. By the summer of 2014, Harrow, Ohio, had settled into a quiet decay. The steel mill stood like a rusted monument, its gates chained, its smokestack silent. The town around it limped along, empty storefronts on Main Street, weeds choking the sidewalks. For the Carter family, survival had become a daily grind. James, now 50, patched together a living as a handyman, fixing fences and leaky pipes for neighbors who could still pay. His hands, once steady on mill machines, shook slightly now, worn by years of strain and whiskey. Lydia, 46, took in sewing, her fingers nimble but her eyes tired. The yellow house on Maple Street sagged under peeling paint, but it held, barely. Ethan Carter was 18, a wiry young man with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp gaze. He'd grown up fast after the mill closed, the weight of his childhood vow pressing heavier each year. High school was behind him now, a diploma earned with late nights and stubborn grit. He'd enrolled at Harrow Community College, studying business part-time, but the real work was at the warehouse, night shifts unloading trucks, the pay just enough to cover books and gas. He moved through life with a quiet fire, his mind always turning, sketching plans in the margins of textbooks. The mill's collapse had taken his father's world, Ethan swore it wouldn't take his. That August, he came home at dawn, his warehouse uniform damp with sweat. James sat on the porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, his toolbox, a cheap replacement for the one he'd sold, beside him. "Long night?" James asked, his voice rough but warm. "Same as always," Ethan said, dropping onto the step. He pulled a crumpled pack of gum from his pocket, offering a piece. James took it, a small ritual they'd kept since Ethan started working. The air was still, the town asleep around them. Ethan glanced at his father, noting the gray in his beard, the slump in his shoulders. "Got a job today?" "Old Mrs. Harper's Gate," James said. "Rusted shut. Should keep me busy till noon." He paused, then added, "You don't have to push so hard, son. School's enough." Ethan shook his head. "School's just a start. I'm building something, Dad. For us." He didn't say the rest, how he saw James's hands idle too often, how Lydia's sewing barely paid the electric bill. James nodded, saying nothing, but his eyes lingered on Ethan, a flicker of pride buried under weariness. The idea had been brewing for months. Ethan had saved $1,200 from the warehouse, every overtime shift, every skipped meal, stashing it in a tin under his bed. He wanted to start a tool repair shop, a nod to James's old skills. The mill was gone, but machines still broke, tractors, lawnmowers, factory gear from nearby towns. He'd use his father's contacts, fix what others couldn't, and build a steady income. It wasn't the mill, but it was a step, a way to keep his vow. By fall 2015, at 19, he made it real. He rented a garage on the edge of Harrow, a drafty space with a cracked concrete floor. He bought second-hand tools with his savings, borrowing a few from James's meager kit. Carter's Fixes, he called it, painting the name on a plank above the door. James helped him set up, hauling an old workbench from their garage, his hands steadying the wood as Ethan hammered nails. "Looks like a real shop," James said, a rare smile tugging his lips. "You got my number if anyone needs a hand." The first weeks were slow but hopeful. Ethan spread the word, flyers at the diner. Calls to old mill buddies James tracked down. A farmer brought in a busted tiller, a mechanic dropped off a seized engine. Ethan worked late, his hands learning the rhythm James had taught him years ago. He'd come home at midnight, grease under his nails, and collapse on the couch, dreaming of expansion, more tools, a bigger space, maybe a truck to haul jobs. Lydia watched with cautious pride. "You're like your father," she said one night, mending a shirt by lamplight. "Can't sit still." Ethan grinned, but the words stung a little. He didn't want to be James, not the James of now, broken by the mill's betrayal. He wanted to be better, to build what the mill couldn't take. By winter, business picked up. Ethan fixed a factory conveyor motor for a plant in Canton, earning $300, a windfall. He paid the rent, bought Lydia a new sewing needle, and slipped $50 into James's coat. For the truck, he said when James found it. James shook his head, but his eyes softened. You're stubborn, kid. Then came the storm. In March 2016, a freak rain hit Harrow, 3 days of pounding water, the river swelling over its banks. Ethan woke to a call from the shop's landlord, "Get down here, kid. It's bad." He raced over, James trailing behind in the truck. The garage was a swamp, ankle-deep water, tools floating, the workbench tipped over. The tiller he'd fixed rusted in a corner, the conveyor motor shorted out, unsalvageable. Ethan stood in the mess, rain dripping from his hair, his fists clenched. "Damn it," he muttered, kicking a bucket. It clattered against the wall, useless. James waded in, salvaging what he could, a wrench, a soaked ledger. "We can dry it out," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The landlord shrugged, "No insurance, no fix. You're on your own." Ethan sank onto a crate, staring at the ruin. His $1,200, gone. The tools, gone. The dream, drowning. James crouched beside him, his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You tried, son. That's more than most. Tried's not enough." Ethan snapped, jerking away. "I'm not like you, Dad, I won't just take it and move on." The words cut deep, sharper than he meant. James flinched, his face hardening, then turned and walked back to the truck, leaving Ethan alone in the flood. That night, Ethan didn't go home. He stayed at the shop, mopping water with a rag, his anger boiling into guilt. He'd seen the hurt in James's eyes, the echo of a man who'd lost everything once already. By dawn, he dragged himself back, finding James asleep on the porch, a blanket over his knees. Lydia met him at the door, her voice low. "He waited for you. Don't push him away, Ethan. He's all we've got." Ethan nodded, shame settling in. He slipped inside, grabbing a wrench from the wreckage, a bent, rusted thing he'd saved. It wasn't much, but it was his. He tucked it into his pocket, a reminder, failure wasn't the end, just a lesson. He'd start again, smarter this time. By summer 2016, at 20, Ethan regrouped. The shop was gone, the lease cancelled, but he wasn't done. He took his warehouse job back, working doubles, and enrolled in night classes again. The $300 from the conveyor job was his seed, enough to buy a laptop and a few tools off eBay. He started small, refurbishing hand tools, drills, saws, wrenches, and selling them online. Carter's Gear, he called it, a nod to the shop that drowned. He set up in the garage at home, James's old space, the drawing still tacked to the wall. James watched from the sidelines, quiet but present. One night, he found Ethan hunched over a drill, sanding rust off the handle. "Need a hand?" he asked, stepping in. Ethan hesitated, then slid the tool over. They worked together, the clink of metal filling the silence. "You're good at this," James said, his voice steady. "Better than I ever was." Ethan looked up, meeting his father's eyes. "You taught me," he said simply. James nodded, a faint smile breaking through. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The online hustle grew slowly. Ethan shipped tools to mechanics in Cleveland, farmers in Indiana. He made $50, then $100, then $200 a month. It wasn't a fortune, but it was his, proof he could build something from nothing. He paid the electric bill 1 month, easing Lydia's frown. James fixed a neighbor's gate and came home with a lead, "Guy in Dayton needs a lathe fixed. Told him about you." Ethan took the job, driving the truck, repaired with his earnings, to make the repair. Another $150 in his pocket. By spring 2017, Ethan was 20 and steady. The warehouse job kept him afloat, school sharpened his mind, and Carter's Gear gave him hope. He'd failed once, hard, but he'd learned, plan better, save more, trust less in luck. The wrench from the flood stayed with him, a talisman of grit. He'd sit on the porch with James some mornings, gum in hand, the mill's skeleton looming across town. "I'm not stopping," he told James one day. "Not till we're safe." James set his mug down, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "I know. Son. I see it." He didn't say more, but he didn't need to. Ethan felt it, the faith, the weight of a father who'd lost his world but found it again in his boy. Act 4, The Breaking Point. By the fall of 2018, Ethan Carter, now 22, had outgrown the garage on Maple Street. Harrow, Ohio, remained a husk of its former self, but Ethan's small online tool business, Carter's Gear, had sparked something bigger. He'd saved $5,000 over 2 years, every sale, every late-night repair, while juggling his warehouse job and community college classes. His vow from childhood burned brighter than ever, to lift his family out of the shadow the steel mill had cast. James, 53, still fixed fences and gates, his hands slower but his quiet support unwavering. Lydia, 48, sewed less now, her eyesight fading, but she smiled more, buoyed by Ethan's grit. Ethan's ambition had a new shape, a startup. At college, he'd met Ryan Kessler, a fast-talking 24-year-old with slick hair and big ideas. Ryan pitched a logistics platform, software to streamline factory supply chains, cutting costs for small manufacturers. "It's the future," Ryan said over cheap beer at a campus bar. "Your mill know-how, my tech skills, will kill it." Ethan saw it, a way to modernize what the mill couldn't, to build something machines couldn't steal. He dropped out of school that spring, betting everything on the dream. They called it Forge Flow. Ethan poured his $5,000 into it, plus a $10,000 loan he sweet-talked from a local bank, using the truck as collateral. Ryan brought coding chops and charm, landing a $20,000 seed from an angel investor in Cleveland. Ethan handled operations, visiting factories, mapping workflows, sketching fixes late into the night. He barely slept, living on coffee and adrenaline, his laptop glowing in the yellow house's dim kitchen. James watched from the sidelines, uneasy but silent. "Just be careful," he said once, his voice low. Ethan nodded, too wired to hear the warning. By summer 2019, Forge Flow took off. They signed 3 clients, small plants in Akron and Youngstown, bringing in $15,000 in revenue. Ethan hired a part-time coder, rented a cramped office above a diner in Harrow, and bought a suit for pitches. Ryan handled investors, flashing a grin that won trust. "We're scaling," he told Ethan, slapping his back. "6 figures by next year." Ethan believed it, picturing the yellow house painted fresh, Lydia resting, James free of odd jobs. He stopped coming home for dinner, his life a blur of meetings and code. The strain crept in. Lydia left voicemails Ethan rarely answered. "We miss you, honey." James lingered on the porch, waiting for the truck's rumble, but Ethan was always late, or not there at all. One night, Lydia cornered him in the kitchen, her hands trembling. "You're disappearing from us," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't what family's for." Ethan rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "I'm doing it for us, Mom. You'll see." She shook her head, walking away, leaving him with the hum of the fridge and his guilt. By winter 2020, cracks showed. Ryan grew cagey, missed meetings, vague excuses. Ethan pushed harder, signing a 4th client, but the numbers didn't add up. Revenue stalled at $25,000, expenses climbing, server costs, coder pay, Ryan's, business trips. Ethan checked the books one night, his stomach sinking, $12,000 gone, siphoned to an account he didn't recognize. He called Ryan, voice shaking. "Where's the money, man?" Ryan laughed, too smooth. "Relax, it's an investment move. You'll see." 2 days later, Ryan vanished. Phone dead, office empty, the investors' calls unanswered. Ethan drove to Ryan's apartment in Canton, lights off, mail piled up. The truth hit: embezzlement. The bank account was drained, the investor pulled out, clients bailed when deliveries failed. Forge flow collapsed overnight, leaving Ethan with a $10,000 debt, a repossessed truck, and nothing to show for 2 years of his life. He sat in the diner office, staring at a blank screen, the bent wrench from his first failure in his pocket, his only anchor. He faced James and Lydia that night, March 2020, the house cold from a cut heating bill. Lydia's eyes welled up as he explained, Ryan's betrayal, the lost money, the debt. "I thought I could fix it," he said, his voice hollow. "I thought I'd make you proud." James stood by the window, silent, his back to the room. Lydia reached for Ethan's hand, but he pulled away. "You believed in me," he said, choking. "And I blew it." "You're still here," Lydia whispered, tears spilling. "That's enough." But it wasn't, not for Ethan. He stormed out, driving a borrowed car to the mill's edge, its rusted frame mocking him in the moonlight. He sat on a bench, staring at the gates, his breath fogging the air. The vow he'd made at 9, "I'll make us strong again," felt like a lie. He'd sacrificed everything, school, sleep, his family, for this, and it was gone. He buried his face in his hands, the weight crushing him. Days blurred into weeks. Ethan holed up in his room, the laptop sold to pay a loan installment. The warehouse wouldn't take him back, COVID had slashed jobs. James and Lydia tiptoed around him, their worry a silent ache. One night, he found a note slipped under his door, James's scrawl, "You're my strength," always, beside it, a sandwich wrapped in foil, James's quiet way of reaching out. Ethan stared at it, tears pricking his eyes, the fight draining out of him. At dawn, April 2020, he found James on the porch, coffee in hand. Ethan sat beside him, the sandwich uneaten between them. "I messed up, Dad," he said, voice raw. "I wanted to be better than this, better than what happened to you." James set his mug down, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "You're not me, son. Never were. I lost a job, you lost a dream. But you're still here, still fighting. That's more than I did." He paused, his voice softening. "Lose everything, but not yourself. I've seen you climb back before. You'll do it again." Ethan looked at him, the man who'd sold his toolbox, who'd shoveled snow to feed them, who'd never stopped believing. The guilt eased, replaced by something fragile, hope. "I pushed you away," he said. "I'm sorry." James squeezed his shoulder. "We're still us, kid. Always will be." They sat in silence, the sun rising over Harrow, the mill's shadow stretching long but powerless. By summer 2021, Ethan, 25, clawed his way back. He took a job at a struggling factory in Dayton, $12 an hour, grunt work, but it was a start. He moved into a cheap rental nearby, sending half his pay home to ease the loan. Nights, he studied the factory, its inefficiencies, its workers' frustrations, its echoes of the mill. He pulled out his old wrench, sketching again, not cranes, but a vision, a company that valued hands over machines, built for people like James. One evening, he drove back to Harrow, finding James in the garage, tinkering with a neighbor's mower. "Got an idea," Ethan said, spreading his sketches on the workbench. "A manufacturing firm, small, fair, ours. I'm learning how it works, inside out." James studied the pages, his fingers tracing the lines. "Sounds like the mill, but better," he said, a spark in his eyes. "What's it need?" "Time," Ethan said. "And you? Tell me what I'm missing." James nodded, pulling up a stool. They talked till midnight, supply chains, worker needs, the old mill's flaws. It wasn't a plan yet, just a seed, but it felt right. Ethan left that night with a new vow, not to fix the past, but to build a future. The wrench stayed in his pocket, a reminder of floods and betrayals, but also of resilience. He'd hit bottom, lost himself, but James had pulled him back. Now, at 25, he saw the path, slow, steady, rooted in family. The mill loomed in his rearview mirror, a ghost he'd bury with something stronger. Act 5, The Triumph. In the summer of 2022, Ethan Carter, now 26, stood at a crossroads. Harrow, Ohio, lingered in its slow decline, but Ethan had clawed his way out of the darkness that had swallowed him after Forge Flow's collapse. His job at the Dayton factory, $12 an hour, hauling steel and sweeping floors, had been a lifeline, not a dream. For 2 years, he'd watched, listened, and learned, how workers grumbled about cut corners, how managers ignored their ideas, how the old mill's ghost still haunted men like his father. Nights, he'd sketched in a cheap apartment, the bent wrench from his first failure always in his pocket, a talisman of grit and second chances. James, 57, remained his anchor. Their talks in the garage had grown into a ritual, Ethan spreading plans, James offering wisdom from 20 years at the mill. "It's the people," James said one night, wiping grease from his hands. "Machines don't care, but men do. Build something for them." Ethan nodded, the seed of an idea taking root, a manufacturing company that honored hands over automation, a tribute to the life the mill had stolen. By fall 2022, Ethan launched Carter Works. He started small, using $2,000 scraped from factory pay and a $5,000 loan from a Dayton credit union, his pitch raw but honest: "I've seen factories fail workers. I won't." He rented a shed outside Harrow, bought second-hand tools, and hired 2 locals, ex-mill hands with weathered faces and steady hands. They rebuilt machinery for small clients, a bakery's oven, a farm's thresher. Ethan worked alongside them, his college business smarts blending with James's practical know-how. "Keep it simple," James advised, joining part-time to train the crew. "Fix what breaks, pay what's fair." The first year was lean but steady. Carter Works turned a $3,000 profit, enough to cover rent and wages. Ethan sent $500 home, easing Lydia's sewing burden. James watched the shed hum with life, his pride quiet but deep. "You're doing it, son," he said one evening, handing Ethan a coffee as they locked up. "Feels like the old days, but better." Ethan smiled, the weight of his vow lightening. "Just a little." By spring 2024, at 28, Ethan's vision grew. Carter Works signed bigger contracts, repairing factory lines in Toledo, retrofitting gear in Columbus. He hired 5 more workers, all Harrow locals, and bought a used van for deliveries. The shed became a workshop, its walls lined with tools and blueprints. Ethan pitched to a Cleveland investor, a gruff woman named Helen Voss, showing her his numbers and his wrench. "This is me," he said, holding it up. "I've failed twice, floods, thieves, but I'm still here." Helen wrote a $50,000 check, her only words: "Don't screw it up." He didn't. Carter Works doubled its revenue to $120,000 that year, its reputation spreading: quality work, fair pay, no layoffs. Ethan paid off the Forge Flow loan, bought Lydia a new sewing machine, and fixed the yellow house's roof. James, now a full-time trainer, walked taller, his hands steady again. Workers called him Pops, a nickname that made him grin. Ethan watched it all, his vow, "I'll make us strong again," taking shape in steel and sweat. Then came the chance. In early 2025, the old Harrow mill hit the auction block, bankrupt, its last owner bled dry by mismanagement. Ethan, 30, saw it in the paper, his heart racing. The mill that had broken James, that had sparked his vow, was within reach. He drove to the gates, staring at the rusted skeleton, smokestacks bent, windows shattered. Memories flooded back, James's tears, the sold toolbox, his own failures. "We can fix it," he whispered, the wrench heavy in his pocket. He risked everything. With Helen's backing and a $200,000 loan, mortgaging the workshop, he bid on the mill. The auction was a blur of suits and numbers, but Ethan won, his voice steady as he signed the deed. March 25, 2025, the date burned into him, Carter Steelworks was born. He kept the bones of the mill but rebuilt it, new machines, yes, but jobs first, 50 workers hired, all locals, trained by James. They made steel parts, beams, rods, gears, for construction and farms, blending old craft with new efficiency. The first day, Ethan stood in the yard, watching the line hum. Workers moved with purpose, James barking orders in his old mill voice. Smoke rose again, not thick like before, but alive. Ethan felt it, the past redeemed, the future his. He paid the crew above market rate, started a fund for their kids' schooling, and hung his wrench on the office wall, a relic of the road he'd walked. That evening, he drove James, 61, to the mill. The sun dipped low, painting the stacks gold. They climbed out, standing at the gates, rusted no more, the Carter Steelworks sign gleaming above. James's breath hitched, his eyes wet. "You brought it back," he said, voice thick. "All these years, and you did it." Ethan gripped his shoulder, his own throat tight. "No, Dad, we did. You showed me how. Every tool, every story, it's here." James turned, tears spilling, and pulled Ethan into a hug, fierce, unyielding, the kind they hadn't shared since Ethan was a boy. They stood there, father and son, the mill alive around them, its whistle blowing soft and steady. Months later, summer 2025, Carter Steelworks thrived. Revenue hit $500,000, orders pouring in from across Ohio. Ethan, married now to a nurse named Sarah, held his newborn son, James Carter II, in the yellow house, its paint fresh, its roof sound. Lydia had passed the year before, her heart giving out, but her spirit lingered in every stitch of the curtains. Ethan built a trade school in her name, free for workers' kids, its first class set for fall. James retired that July, his hands finally resting. But he came to the mill daily, a gray cap pulled low, watching the line with a quiet smile. Workers tipped their hats, kids called him Grandpa Pops. One afternoon, Ethan found him by the gates, the sun setting red over Harrow. "You happy, Dad?" Ethan asked, his son gurgling in a carrier against his chest. James looked at the mill, then at Ethan, his eyes clear. "Happier than I've been since '04. You gave me this, son, gave us all this." He reached out, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the other brushing little James's head. "It's yours now. Keep it going." They stood there, the three of them, as workers filed out, laughing, tired, alive. The whistle blew, a sound Ethan had once dreamed of as a boy sketching cranes. He thought of the vow, made at 9 in a cold room, "I'll make us strong again." It wasn't just strength he'd built, it was a home, a legacy, a promise kept. The mill's shadow stretched long, but it was theirs now, not a ghost but a beacon. Ethan tightened his grip on James's shoulder, the wrench in his pocket a silent witness. "This is for you, Dad," he thought, the words unspoken but felt. The sun sank, the mill glowed, and Harrow breathed again, not as it was, but as it could be, forged by a son's love and a father's hands. And there it is, the sun setting over a reborn mill, a father's tears of pride staining the ground, a son's vow carved into steel and sweat, proving that even the darkest collapses can forge empires of light. This is Heartfelt Tales at its core, stories that claw their way out of despair to stand tall, stories that demand you feel every jagged edge. Ethan Carter didn't just rebuild a factory, he rebuilt a family, a town, a legacy, and maybe, just maybe, he's rebuilt something in you, too. Don't let this end here, hit that like if it moved you, spill your thoughts in the comments. What would you sacrifice for a dream, and subscribe if you're ready for more tales that cut deep and lift high. We're not done yet, next time, I'll bring you another saga to rattle your bones and warm your heart. Stay with me at Heartfelt Tales, because these aren't just stories, they're battles won. See you in the next one.